Welcome to the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. As we resume our study on online hate, we have a couple of procedural things to start with. We're going to be naming a Conservative Vice Chair of the committee, and I'm going to turn it over to the clerk to be able to do that. Mr. Clerk, Monsieur Le Greffier, c'est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, je suis prêt à recevoir les motions pour le poste de premier vice-président du comité.
So, for the first Vice Chair of the committee, I would ready to receive nominations. Lisa Raitt. Are there any other nominations?
That the Honourable Lisa Raitt be elected as first Vice Chair of this committee. Is the committee in agreement with this motion? Plaît-il au comité d'adopter la motion?
Mr. Garrison?
Do we have an indication from Ms. Raitt that she's prepared to accept?
Yes.
Has the committee received an indication?
My understanding is I've certainly received an email from her saying she's prepared to accept.
Thank you very much.
So is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt this motion? Oui.
Yes.
Alors, je déclare la motion adoptée et l'honorable.
I declare the motion carried. So, Ms. Raitt is elected first Vice Chair of the committee in absentia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that we want to get to the Conservatives witnesses in due course. I have a motion to put on the table that I'm asking colleague to send around. I'll read it into the record so it can be in both languages. The document that I'm sending around is in both languages. Here's the motion. Whereas the treatment by Mr. Cooper of the President of the Alberta Muslim Public Affairs Council was discriminatory, hurtful, and disrespectful. And whereas reading into the record the comments from the terrorist attacker in Christchurch, New Zealand was inappropriate, be it resolved that the committee recommends that the name of the attacker in the Christchurch, New Zealand massacre, as well as any quoted portion of his manifesto, be expunged from the committee's Hansard, and that the committee report this recommendation to the House.
Okay. Just give me 1 second, please. Online hate. I believe this motion is receivable, and it's related to the online hate study we're doing right now, since it related to a meeting that we did on online hate, so the 48-hour rule wouldn't apply. So I'll rule this as a receivable, and Mr. Boissonnault, the floor is yours if you want to speak to your motion.
Well, Mr. Chair, thanks very much. I think the motion speaks for itself. I think we've had conversations and ex-camera on this matter. It's a sensitive matter. We expect Canadians to be able to come to this committee and be heard and to not receive the kind of treatment that Mr. Suri received. At the same time, we also play a role in Canada and the international community, and I think it's important that this reference be expunged from our committee's record.
Thank you, Mr. Boissonnault. Is there anyone, Mr. Garrison? Then Mr. Broussard. Mr. Garrison, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I certainly welcome this motion. I think what we have before us is not just in order, but very important. We have seen the government of New Zealand, which has tried very much to make sure that the manifesto of the Christchurch shooter and his name not become infamous. And so we live in an era of social media. We live in an era where things spread like wildfire. We live in an era when sometimes people confuse free speech, which is about the rational exchange of ideas, with throwing gasoline on the fires. We've just seen this morning another shooting incident in Australia and Darwin. We don't know anything about the reasons, but we certainly live in what I would call incendiary times. And so I think we have a responsibility as a committee of Parliament to make sure that we do not contribute to that and that we respect the wishes of the New Zealand government in trying to make sure that those who engage in violent acts based on extremist ideologies do not get a public forum to spread their ideas. And just to be clear, I am not opposed to people having ideas or people thinking ideas. What I'm opposed to is giving a public platform for the spreading of those violent ideas and for the spreading of hatred. And I think by excising this testimony, we would contribute in that manner.
Thank you, Mr. Broussard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for the record, the Leader of the Opposition has dealt with this. Mr. Cooper has apologized for his comments. This is nothing more than a stunt, and I call the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Well, I know you can't call the question, and I'm just going to provide that, but I didn't see anybody else that had their hand up to speak. Oh, Mr. Garrison, I'm sorry.
So I guess I would say with respect to Mr. Broussard, and Mr. Broussard and I have a long history of working together on things, I disagree quite firmly this morning. It's not up to the Leader of the Opposition to decide when this is over. There was an attack on a witness before the committee. It's up to this committee to decide when and if things are over. While I respect the limited action which the Leader of the Opposition took, this is clearly a responsibility of the committee itself to make decisions for itself about what the right thing is to do on this occasion. And so I would not take the time to restate my remarks, but it's simply the Leader of the Opposition's dealing with his own caucus members and who speaks for his caucus is something which he has to deal with himself. If he wishes to have Mr. Cooper to continue to be a spokesperson for him on justice, that's his decision and all the consequences that flow with that. But this is the decision which the committee must make itself.
Thank you. I saw Mr. Boissonnault's hand and Mr. Barrett's hand, and then we have witnesses, so I'm just pointing
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. There's nothing in the motion that calls for any additional sanctions on Mr. Cooper. This is simply about doing the right thing here at the Justice Committee and cleaning up the record from something that's regrettable and should have never been part of our record.
Thank you. Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Chair, opposition members have a limited amount of time to call witnesses during this study. The study has been going on for some time. This is our last witness panel. These witnesses are under limited time to testify. I would again ask that the chair call the question so that we can proceed with hearing the testimony to complete our study.
So, Mr. Barrett, I appreciate that. The chair can't just call a question as long as there's a member that wishes to speak. But I don't see any other members that wish to speak at this point, so we can actually move to the question. All those in a request for a recorded vote, I'm going to turn it to the clerk then. Okay. Yay to the motion would be yes to Mr. Boissonnault's motion, and nay would be against. Mr. Clerk.
Merci.
Merci.
Monsieur Boissonnault?
Oui.
Mr. Ehassi?
Yes.
Mr. Fraser?
Yes.
Mr. Erskine-Smith?
Yes.
And Mr. McKinnon?
Yes.
Mr. Barrett?
I'll abstain.
Monsieur Brassard?
I'll abstain.
And Mr. McKenzie?
I'll abstain.
Mr. Garrison?
Yes.
So, yeas 5, contre 0.
Wouldn't there be 6? There's 9 people here. I think there's 6 yes.
Yes, sorry, 6. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so the motion is adopted. Mr. Garrison?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Not being the permanent representative on this committee, I received a very late notice that this session was to be televised. And I guess my question is that none of the previous testimony by witnesses has been televised. And so it seems peculiar to me that only the last segment of this would actually be televised by the committee. So I guess I'm going to ask the chair why that's taking place, but perhaps short circuit that by simply saying that I'll move at this time that this meeting not be televised any further.
I'm going to not be televised.
Still, yeah. Yeah.
I don't think it would be debatable, I mean.
Okay, so it is a receivable motion which is non-debatable and non-amendable according to the clerk. On a point of order, Mr. Barrett?
Yeah, I guess I would just, for my clarification, my understanding is that the committee doesn't decide, committee members don't decide which meetings are televised and which are only communicated by audio only. So if we don't make the proactive decision to televise, why would we make the reactive decision at a committee to cease the broadcast?
So I think that's let's call that a question of information. To be fair, I thought because there was interest that I had seen in this meeting, I suggested it be televised, but there's a receivable motion on the floor that is non-debatable and non-amendable at this point to not televise. So,
Point of information.
well, I was allowing it because Mr. Barrett was genuinely curious. You put forward a motion which is non-debatable and non-amendable, Mr. Garrison. I suggest we probably should get to a vote so we can get to the witnesses one way or the other, if that's okay. Since it's non-debatable and non-amendable.
Well, with respect, Mr. Chair, you did
the point of order. Sorry.
clarification.
Yeah.
Just based on Mr. Garrison's point that he raised, I just want to make it absolutely clear that the meeting is public.
Yes.
And that the motion isn't to go in camera.
Yes, so I totally understand.
broadcast.
Oh, in case there was any confusion, I totally understand that your motion is simply that the meeting remain completely public and simply have an audio recording and not be televised. Yes, I think that's understood. So again, this is a non-debatable, non-amendable motion. We will go to a vote. Is there anyone that wants a recorded vote? Mr. Garrison wishes a recorded vote. I'm going to turn it again to the clerk, Monsieur de Graffier.
Monsieur Boissonnault,
Agreed.
Mr. Ehassi,
Agreed.
Mr. Fraser,
Yes.
Mr. Erskine-Smith,
I'm here on Icker's behalf, so yes.
Mr. McKinnon,
Yes.
Mr. Barrett,
Yeah.
Monsieur Brassard,
Oui.
Mr. McKenzie,
Yes.
and Mr. Garrison.
Yes.
So in favor 10, against 0. So
Favor 10, so we will not televise this the rest of this meeting,
Suspend for a
and
minute,
I will
30
suspend for 1 minute, and we will move to an audio recording, and then we will hopefully start with the witnesses. Today, as individuals, we have Ms. Lindsay Shepherd, welcome, Mr. John Robson, welcome, and Mr. Mark Steyn, welcome. Each of the witnesses will speak in turn. Ms. Shepherd, you're on the list first. We're going to go in the order of the agenda. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Honorable members, thank you for the invitation to appear today. Earlier this year, I received a 7-day suspension from the social media website Twitter for violating their rules against hateful conduct. According to the Twitter rules, you may not promote violence against, threaten, or harass other people on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender, gender identity, religious affiliation, age, disability, or serious disease. So what was my tweet that supposedly promoted violence, threatened, or harassed someone? Well, my tweet referenced an individual that I cannot name here today due to a publication ban in this country. This individual can only be referred to as JY. JY is an individual that has taken 14 female estheticians to the BC Human Rights Tribunal because they declined to perform waxing services on his male genitalia. There are also screenshots of Facebook messages between JY and others, where it appears he makes very predatory comments about wanting to help 10 to 12-year-old girls with their tampons in bathroom stalls. In the tweet that got me suspended, I referred to JY as a guy who creeps on young girls and vulnerable working women in the Vancouver area. And I posted some of the Facebook messages he has written about his plans to approach young girls in the female washrooms. Why was it deemed hateful conduct for me to write this tweet? Because JY purports to be a male-to-female transgender person. And so by alerting people to his troubling conduct, I got kicked off Twitter for 7 days because what I wrote was seen as a transgression against his gender identity. Prominent Canadian feminist Megan Murphy was permanently banned from Twitter for misgendering the same individual, JY, that I have just spoken about, and for tweeting, "Men aren't women, though." These tweets also fell under Twitter's hateful conduct policy. Murphy is now suing Twitter because as a journalist, her livelihood is largely dependent on her online presence, and she is being denied an online presence and being denied the ability to participate in the public square, as online spaces are today's public square. I am concerned about the potential return of legislation such as Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, because what that legislation does is punish Canadians who, in exercising their right to peaceful free expression, might offend a member of a protected marginalized group. If someone with a marginalized identity experiences commentary they find offensive, they can claim the offense is an attack on their identity rather than being legitimate expression. Human rights tribunals become the tools by which those who speak their mind peacefully and nonviolently are silenced. Many other witnesses before this committee have discussed the need for a definition of hate, and many call for a need to draw the line between free speech and hate speech. As a graduate student at Wilfrid Laurier University in 2017 and 2018, I woke up to how my peers and academic superiors understand hate. When the word got out that I had played an excerpt from TV Ontario's The Agenda with Steve Paikin in the classroom that I was a teaching assistant for, an excerpt that featured psychologist Dr. Jordan Peterson discussing Bill C-16, compelled speech and gender pronouns, a PhD student at my university said at a rally that I had played hate speech in the classroom and had violated the spirit of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Likewise, a professor at George Brown College named Dr. Griffin Epstein asserted in a letter to the Toronto Star that I had played, quote, hate speech in the classroom